Welcome to Two Bees in a Podcast, brought to you by the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It is our goal to advance the understanding of honeybees and beekeeping, grow the beekeeping community, and improve the health of honeybees everywhere. In this podcast, you'll hear research updates, beekeeping management practices discussed, and advice on beekeeping from our resident experts, beekeepers, scientists, and other program guests. Join us for today's program, and thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast. In today's episode of Two Bees in a Podcast, we are joined by Dr. Jay Evans, who is a United States Department of Agriculture scientist at the Bee Research Laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland. He is joining us to talk about USDA Bee Research Laboratories in general, what they do for beekeepers, and how they address beekeeper needs. We will follow that with an interview of Miss Jennifer Holmes, who is the president of the Florida State Beekeepers Association. We'll be interviewing Jennifer about what state beekeepers associations do on behalf of their beekeepers. And of course, we'll finish today's episode of Two Bees in a Podcast with a question and answer series, Stump the Chump. So listeners, thank you for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast. Obviously, this is one of the ways that we try to get information to you through our podcast, but we're really just one lab. We're one lab out of a lot of labs globally trying to address bee health, bee-related issues, and help beekeepers. In the United States, we have a set of labs that are managed at the federal level. These are our United States Department of Agriculture Bee Research Laboratories. So there's a handful of those scattered around the country. I know there's even some new ones that will be popping up soon or that have popped up recently. And in order to tell you about those labs, we brought in one of the research leaders from one of those USDA labs, and that research leader is Dr. Jay Evans. He is based at the USDA ARS Bee Research Laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland. So, Jay, thank you for joining us on Two Bees in a Podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Jay, we're kind of bringing you in to talk about what the USDA labs are in general, and then we'll kind of hone in specifically on the lab that you are the research leader for up in Beltsville. So, can you tell us a little bit about your position specifically at the USDA, and then maybe we'll let Amy ask you some specific questions about bee research labs at the USDA level in general. So let's just start with you, who you are, the one you work at, and a little bit about what you do at the USDA.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a scientist with the USDA ARS Bee Research Laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland. I've been a research entomologist there for 21 years, the last 6 of which I've been the research leader of our group of scientists there. And this involves, as you might expect, managing budgets and such, and also advocating and working to develop opportunities for the scientists in the laboratory. And of course, the latter is the job, the part of the job that's the most fun and rewarding. So we are a group devoted to honeybee research and to applied research primarily on honeybees and the threats that they might face.
Awesome. Can you tell me what ARS stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's
the
Agricultural
okay.
Research Service. And it's the branch of USDA that's devoted, it's an intramural branch devoted to research on any number of crop issues, animal, livestock, even human nutrition are all encompassed by this, by ARS.
Oh, very cool. Can you tell us about some of the USDA Bee Research Labs in the nation? How many are there? And is it typical to have a research leader with, like a certain amount of scientists that work under them?
Sure. Yeah. So again, as being part of one of several, I don't have tremendous insights across the breadth of them, other than to say we do have 4 historical bee research laboratories, and there's ours in Beltsville. There's the Baton Rouge Honeybee Genetics and Breeding Laboratory. As you might imagine, their strength and their trait is on making better bees, from Russian bees to Varroa-sensitive hygiene and other traits. The new Poline lineage of bees, for example. So they do research on genetic traits of honeybees with the hope of developing and partnering with industry to bring out better genetics in bees. There's also the Carl Hayden Bee Research Center in Tucson, Arizona, and they have largely had a focus on forage and nutrition, so sort of landscape level effects. They're doing really neat work on that, both in very close in Arizona, but also in California towards the almond industry, and in the Dakotas, in the northern Great Plains, where there's certainly a lot of beekeeping and impact of bees. And there is also a USDA ARS bee lab in Logan, Utah, and that has been the lab historically focused on the hundreds of other bee species, especially the ones most important for agriculture, like bumblebees, mason bees, and leafcutter bees. So those are the four current kind of brick and mortar, long-standing bee labs for USDA. But there's some great efforts and scientists in places like Davis, California, Stoneville, Mississippi, and Fargo, who are also in that fold and doing bee research. And we all get together at meetings, certainly electronically, especially this spring, and go over research. We're under a program where we try to coordinate research, not overlap so much with each other. So it's it's a fairly diverse set of research programs and a group of scientists who are in different parts of the country.
So Jay, kind of from the outside looking in, since I work for a university, it looks like to us that the USDA labs essentially have kind of specialties. You'd mentioned that already. For example, the Baton Rouge lab, they focus on breeding and genetics, and you said the one out in Tucson's more of nutrition and forage, et cetera. So it looks like that's what happens. Maybe they all have different specialties, but also the structure of a lab is there's usually one kind of research leader, right? And then there'll be multiple scientists, usually 3 to 5 at that lab, and each of those doing their own kind of branch of whatever the general lab focuses on. Just want to talk a little bit about the structure of one.
That's right. Yeah. And maybe because we are a government agency or a government group unit, there is a structure, but we also, kind of blend together in our interests. But the Beltsville Laboratory has been historically and is focused on disease and disease management issues. So everything from American foul brood to viruses and fungal pathogens and pathogens now of adult bees. So kind of the span of bad actors that can impact honeybees. We have 6 scientists, 5 of us running kind of field or lab projects on everything from physiology and the effects of chemicals, with Dr. Stephen Cook, who's also picked up, I think in collaboration with you in Gainesville, a big varroa mite program.
That's right. Well. Absolutely. I know Steve. Yep.
And Dr. Miguel Corona, who's been looking at interactions of nutrition and disease lately, and the physiology of bees, how their long-term impacts of having a bad food day might be. Dr. Judy Chen is a scientist working very closely with me. We're both really keen on diseases and also how bees fend off those diseases. She's an expert in viruses and nosema and has longstanding work in that realm. We have a new research scientist, Dr. Mohammed Albaraki, and he aspires to kind of blend some of our projects together at the colony level. So looking at both chemical stress and other stresses on bees at colonies, at the colony level. And he will use some of these sort of newer technologies, such as RFID tags on bees, to kind of see what happens in the big picture as they go out and about in their lives. And we're also joined by Dr. Anna Childers, who's a computational biologist. And she, again, kind of bridges different projects and has some larger scale projects with genomics for ARS as a whole, sequencing insect genomes. So that's the group, but those are the ones sitting kind of doing research, but also planning for the year. And then we have 8 other full-time employees supporting those efforts and really driving many of the experiments themselves. And they're a great set of people. We're full up, as it were, for employees, and we couldn't be happier with the staff there. And then I think, as with your unit, the Honeybee Research and Extension Lab, we also benefit from visitors. So our population is almost always double those 14 in terms of scientists at all stages in their careers, students, volunteers, and such. And then in the summer, we pick up a few more to help with field projects. So at the max, we're about 30 people in the building.
That's amazing. It's always so fun to hear about, different specialties and, of course, all the research that's going on. And I know I've said it before in past podcasts, but it's just, there's so much to be done. You might agree with it, you might disagree with it, but there's just so much research that can be done, which is really awesome. So you've just told us about your research projects. And so I guess I have a question about the research that you all do. You said you had some field research and some lab research. Do you guys have an apiary? Do you normally collaborate with beekeepers, or how does that research kind of look like as far as field research goes?
Yeah, great question. So we're actually lucky enough to be on a 4,000 acre campus that's historically been there for USDA. And we have 10 to 12 apiaries scattered across campus for different projects, some of which are aspiring to be more isolated than others, and some that are right outside the building. Some of the colonies that I'll tap into for samples for testing disease are a walk outside the back door of the building next to our pollinator garden. So we in the summer, we get up to nearly 300 colonies, and then we pare back quite a bit in the winter, but always, a bit more than 100, maybe 140 or so colonies. Most of the field projects are being run by Doctors Cook and Corona, and I think Mohammed will also kick in, of course, with those. But Judy and I kind of aspire to that too. So we'll have our own pet apiaries with between 12 to 20 colonies, and we'll kind of mess around with those as well to test some of mainly following disease loads and occasionally doing a trial medicine for those colonies. But yeah, so that's the lay of the land for the colonies. And then, of course, we have indoor laboratories where we do genetics work and chemistries and things like that. And the hope is that we're looking at management tools. So we'll try, as I mentioned, Dr. Cook is hot on the trail with collaborators to get the next generation of herbicides. Judy and I are really keen to find an antiviral treatment of some sort. So we've tried natural products, mushroom extracts, RNA interference. We're very broad in terms of what we will prospect on for that, and we've worked with other researchers, of course, in that, because ideas come from all over. And just trying to sort out with experimentation, bees in cups quite often, or even injected bees, just to see if we can get some leads on that window, because we don't really have anything to offer beekeepers for things like viruses currently.
Sure.
So Jay, one of the things that's always amazing to me is, when I wear my scientist hat and I show up at meetings, is I often see, USDA scientists. You mentioned at your lab there, or your area, there's 6, and then you mentioned these other labs, and I'm assuming there's 3 to 5 of those, people at each of those. So there's 20 to 25 USDA scientists in the U.S. working on bees?
I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay. So that's a lot of diversity. And it's as you've mentioned, it's federally funded, and you've also mentioned the application to beekeepers. So I'm just curious, how do you set your priorities to address beekeeper needs, right? I struggle with that here at the University of Florida sometimes. So I just wonder, on the national level, the federal level, where you're working across states, as it were, how do you set your priorities to make sure you're addressing those needs that the beekeepers, feel they have?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's as in your laboratory, it's often on our minds to get feedback from beekeepers, to find out if there's a new scourge for beekeeping, and from I'm not going to say it, but the murder hornet on down.
You had to say it, Jay, the murder hornet. Come on.
Well, since she said it, our podcast is now going to get 50,000 more listens.
That's true.
And I did hear your fantastic interview with the great scientist from Washington State. So yeah, that's a topic that's been, let's say, discussed. But no, we aren't working directly on those as a research topic, other than maybe some genetics with Anna's work.
Well, dang, I was going to send all of our callers over to you.
Yeah, we've finally at least learned how to identify it, so that's a plus. There is a voucher for the Washington State one as a plug for USDA that's being held by the Beltsville, the Systematic Entomology Laboratory. So the one wasp collected last December is in their possession, and it's physically in the Smithsonian, the National Natural History Museum, but it's under minus one leg, sadly, which was taken for its genetic identification. It will be.
Did you see it, Jay? Have you seen it yet?
I haven't seen the physical one. I have pictures of it.
Oh, that's a bummer, because I was about to ask, did it kill you? But nevertheless, the point that I was trying to make, and I think that you're really illustrating well, is that, USDA is a tremendous resource for beekeepers. And I love the fact that there's so much diversity. I love the fact that there's a breeding and genetics lab, right, that's cranking out new stocks. I love the fact that there's forage and nutrition. They all do other things as well, but that's cranking out new information about nutrition. Historically, as you mentioned, the Beltsville lab's been the disease and pest lab, and so much has come out. And, you can even mention that you guys offer diagnostic services, right? Beekeepers can send samples to you to figure out what it is they have in their colonies.
Oh, yes, and I was remiss in that. I'm so sorry. Yes, we've have. In fact, our birth was from a service and efforts in DC at the Whitten Building, right, perched on the Smithsonian Mall or the Capitol Mall, doing diagnostics, doing disease, starting with American foul brood, which was formally at least named by a USDA researcher 114 now, I guess, years ago. So that diagnostic service has evolved over 100 years and is a big part of our contact with beekeepers, and especially the state inspectors. So we can offer free diagnostics, especially for brood disease, which is, again, the root of this service, and we provide those to any number of folks, from hobby beekeepers to commercial beekeepers, and of course the inspectors. And the goal, the reportable goal or the actionable goal is of course to try to limit American foul brood. But we get EFB samples in droves these days, and we also do a service to check mite counts and nosema counts for those beekeepers where that they just maybe want a second opinion from their own abilities. So the diagnostic service is a great way, and we get kind of a bead on what's happening in different states that way in terms of brood disease. It's there's been upticks of EFB in different places, so we get that as a great way to do different experiments later in our laboratories. If we find out EFB is a problem, we might pick up some research in that direction, for example. So and that is the truth is also with our university colleagues. There's so many questions to tackle with bees, and there's so many different ways and different expertise of the scientists, and so it's like you have an army looking at it, and you all want to kind of do what you're good at and try to benefit from the manifold more research that's in different institutions. So we all there's a lot of I guess coordination and discussion of research at meetings and online to kind of help us shape what would be most impactful.
Yeah, that's just exciting. I look out and I see it seems to me that the USDA is even bulking up some, right? They're adding positions, adding places. And I just think that there's even more great things that's going to come out of the USDA research labs in the future. I'm excited to watch it. I'm glad it's happening now. I think it's going to be a great benefit to beekeepers, really not just in the U.S., but outside the U.S. as well. So Jay, I really thank you so much for joining us today to talk about all that the USDA offers and what they do on behalf of bees and bee health.
Thank you very much, Jamie and Amy. It's been super talking to both of you, and I truly enjoy your podcast, and also, of course, the huge efforts you're making for bee health as well.
Well, thanks, Jay. Guys, you've been listening to Dr. Jay Evans, who's the research leader at the USDA ARS Bee Research Laboratories stationed in Beltsville, Maryland. All of these labs will have links to the labs in our show notes so that you can go check out their website, see what it is they do, see the scientists who are there. I regularly use the scientists as resources for questions that I have, and I think you guys will find them useful as well. So make sure you visit the show notes and take a look at what the USDA research labs do for you.
For more information about this podcast, check out our website at ufhoneybee.com.
One of the things that you'll find out when you get into beekeeping is that there are bee clubs absolutely everywhere. Sometimes people ask me, Amy, when I'm traveling, what are you traveling for? I'm like, well, I'm going to go give a talk about bees. They're like, well, who are you going to give a talk about bees to? I said, well, beekeepers. They're like, there are beekeeper clubs? I was like, yeah, there's beekeeper clubs. When I was hired in Florida in 2006, I think there were maybe a dozen or 24 beekeeping associations in the state of Florida, but now there's 40 plus. And, you know, with these bee loss issues, clubs have exploded. There's local bee clubs popping up everywhere, including in big cities. So there's local clubs, there's state clubs, regional clubs, national clubs, and even international beekeeping organizations. So listeners, the reason I'm introducing this topic this way is because you likely have a bee club near you, and I want to spend some time talking about the value of beekeeping clubs, beekeeping organizations, what they mean for you as beekeepers, how you can get involved. And we are blessed today to have a great guest, Jennifer Holmes, who's the president of the Florida State Beekeepers Association. She's also the owner and proprietor of the Honey Company and is a
it's honey.
Honey, I know. I was going to mess it up anyway, but she's also the UF IFA Senior Honey Judge. And the reason we're using Jennifer is because our state association here in Florida is a really good model for other state associations. It's been very productive. Jennifer, I'm sorry for, even though we went over it pre-show, I'm sorry
We practiced this, Jamie.
Messing up Honey Company. So you can go ahead and chastise me as you get welcomed onto the microphone.
Jamie, you're not alone. It happens all the time. We just chuckle about it, but thank you for
the shameful thing is I prepared and then I failed. I was like, oh my gosh, what was the word? I'm about to introduce her honey company, but then it was too late. It was all up. But it makes sense. HANI, so it should be honey. All right.
It's all good.
So Jennifer, we have a lot to talk to you about today. You know, you're the president of the Florida State Beekeepers Association. You wear so many other hats. You do beekeeping, commercial beekeeping. You're involved in so many ways, but we really have you here today to talk to you about the value of state organizations, or for that matter, any beekeeping organization. But before we get started, our listeners are going to want to know, how did you get into beekeeping in the first place?
I got into beekeeping, Jamie and Amy. Has anybody else besides me said that rhymes? I can't be.
Yes.
Yeah, Jamie, Amy, Jamie. Yeah.
And then we call Umberto Schmamie. So it's
anytime we have another host, we try to make them have a rhyming name, since Amy and I are so fortunate to have a rhyming name.
I got into beekeeping just out of interest, literally. I had always been into nature, plants, food. Gosh, I love to eat. I get excited about all our local farmers.
Don't we all?
Oh my gosh. So we live, I think, in such a really unique area, kind of like different than other parts of the rest of the U.S., Florida. And it's not where I'm from. I moved here about 25 years ago, and it took me a little while to get used to, the differences in weather patterns. And, it's summer here in spring, and in winter it's spring, and we've got a lot of interesting dynamics. Luckily, when I started beekeeping, and it was about 2012, the number of beekeepers in the state was still pretty low. I want to say like 700 or 800 maybe. Does that sound about right, Jamie? Like 2012, 2000.
Yeah, we were growing a little bit at that. When I got hired in 2006, we were just under 1,000. I think it's kind of been growing, and then about 12, 13 is when it just really exponentially started going up.
Well, the gentleman I worked with had been doing it for about 40 years, so he just had, a couple hundred hives and made a voluminous amount of honey and really had it dialed in. It was all done by hand, no mechanization. So imagine, 30 or 40 acres on the coast of Florida and Southeast Florida, just kind of interacting with nature and getting exposed to bees, I was kind of instantly hooked. It was just magical. I got to do all the things most people need help with that don't want to do.
Don't we all?
Cleaning frames, stacking boxes, storage, feeding bees, and eventually bottling honey. But, I got that little taste of beekeeping here and there, and it really I got just immediately hooked. So I would, raise 5 or 10 hives, 5 or 10 of them would die, and then I'd start all over again. And that happened for a couple of years. And then my husband joined in. He was just as interested, but being the gentleman he is, he had gotten me my first lesson with the commercial beekeeper and took a side position. And then he loved it too. And so the two of us were not beekeepers when we met. That's, I think. But we both started beekeeping, and after about 7 years, we were able to work part-time, our full-time jobs, and eventually quit and started our honey company. And that's been about 5 years. So 5 years in, and as a president of a state beekeepers association, I've seen such changes in such a short period of time. Haven't you guys? I mean, one of the things that I find so interesting about having a state organization, and by the way, we're 100 years old this year, Florida State
Awesome.
Association.
Congratulations.
I would have liked to have seen it in 1920. I think that's...
Yeah, definitely. Well, so Jennifer, we are so grateful and fortunate to have you in the state of Florida and being a huge leader, for all these beekeepers with the state. And I know that you're involved in so many different projects, and I assume that you work with new beekeepers or people who are just interested in keeping bees because you're just so good at outreach and education. So how would you describe the State Beekeepers Association to someone that you just met?
I would describe it as an organization that provides education. So yeah, absolutely. We interact with new beekeepers all the time, but also sort of a filter for all the different subjects and topics that come up in beekeeping that need attention and are difficult to mitigate or come up with solutions for, and support other associations, agencies, and organizations. Mm-hmm. Florida Department of Agriculture, yourself, the University of Florida. I mean, all these things. Amy, you've seen a lot of them since you came on board, and I oh my gosh, my hat is off to you. I mean, just this week, the Asian hornet, holy mackerel, we are just...
We'll talk about that in a different segment.
Oh my gosh, we're just constantly having to face phone calls about different things. I'd say some of our number one things that we have to be a resource for are bee removals. So we get a lot of consumers and citizens that are concerned about having bees on their property. They don't know exactly what to do. The second thing is we get a lot of people calling because they're concerned about what's happening to honeybees, and they don't also, again, know what to do. And any of these topics come up and are difficult for our associations and agencies and other nonprofits to mitigate. We sort of, as a state association, will take that task on. So we have a varied amount of officers that have different backgrounds. Most of them are beekeepers, but, and again, most of them have been involved in their local association. So I'd say if I was to put it in context, I got involved as a beekeeper, the story I told in the beginning, and then I started going to my local meeting. And then I discovered the University of Florida, IFAS and Honeybee Research and Extension Lab, and you guys with the Master Beekeeper Program and Bee College, and I dove right in. I mean, that was a definite huge door to education and getting involved. And then I started learning about the state association, and I got involved. And I felt like I had the opportunity to do things that would be helpful. I know, Jamie, you might mention some of the things that you've seen the state association do in your tenure and over the years that you've been talking out there, but I've had a blast the last few years going to the local association meetings and literally meeting all the beekeepers across the state and being able to explain what the association does. And I still feel like there's a ton of work to do, but behind the scenes, our state association is constantly having meetings, say monthly, and we're liaising with our regional association, so Eastern Apiculture Society, American Beekeeping Federation. We usually have a representative from the state among those associations. We usually have somebody sitting on the Honeybee Technical Council. Our state's lucky enough to have a Honeybee Technical Council. If your state doesn't have one, you should reach out to us and ask us about it. And that's something that may benefit you. So we get involved in national and international stuff too, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, when I think about associations, I usually kind of work my way from the bottom up. These local associations, these county associations or regions within a state, they are really good opportunities for education, providing resources to beekeepers, and networking for beekeepers. And occasionally you'll see these local associations kind of take on maybe a local issue of political interest to beekeepers. But by the time you're at the state level, like you are at the president of Florida State Beekeepers Association, you're tackling issues that beekeepers from all walks of life are having. And right, you know, in Florida alone, and a lot of other states and other countries around the world can say the same thing, there's this huge span of beekeepers, from hobbyists with one colony to commercial beekeeper with tens of thousands. And this state association has to represent all those beekeepers and all of those interests. And then you'll have some people say, well, why would I want to join a state association? What value would it get to me? So my question to you then, Jennifer, is why should beekeepers join any association for that matter, but specifically state or national associations?
I think one of the best reasons would be because the organization has the opportunity to refine that networking and really filter through all the data. Like, for example, our association recently formed a few new committees. You know, outreach is one of them, and we're lucky enough to have some amazing beekeepers on these committees. We realize that with the changing world of beekeeping and all the different crises and issues we're facing, topics, we had to come up with a little bit of a different approach. Two of our other committees right now that I think any new member would feel comfortable supporting are our commercial beekeeping committee and our small scale beekeeping committee. And they're starting to reach out to beekeepers, not only in Florida, but outside, and finding out what the major issues they're facing are. And we're coming up with ways to, you know, tackle those. And again, liaising directly with other organizations and agencies that have, you know, really good structure and ability to try to work on that. We also reach out to our local representatives, state representatives, legislatively. You know, it's not my forte. I'll be the first to admit that when I joined the association as a leader, I had to tell them, look, we really need to have some people that are skilled here to help us facilitate these things. And so I've learned a ton about what needs to be done, and I've learned it's a lot of work. That's what I'll say. But year after year, our association is, you know, going to bat to try to create an identity for beekeepers that I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm still finding that through the Department of Agriculture in our state, we don't really have the identity that I'd like to see us have. I've traveled to a couple other states in the last year, Colorado being one of them, and it was an event that wasn't primarily for beekeeping, but they really embraced beekeeping. The organization is Slow Food USA. And they have this really cool event in Denver every year called Slow Food Nations. And I had the opportunity to listen to their Department of Agriculture leader speak, and I was blown away at how much embracing and legislative support there was for beekeeping there. That I said, this is one way we could, you know, grow as an organization, is to liaise and sort of see success somewhere else and then bring it home and try to emulate it here. So I hope that helps people understand what we're really ultimately doing behind the scenes and how much we value the membership, and it can really support us, because we're all volunteers so far in this organization, basically.
So, you know, I do also travel quite a bit, Jennifer, and I'm often speaking at states. In fact, I had to add this up the other day. I think I've spoken at 36 or 37 state associations around the country. There's still some states that haven't had me, but maybe someday they will. Nevertheless, so I've seen a lot of people's state bee club, their meetings. I've talked with their officers. I've listened to things, and you know, they have some of the same issues that we have here in Florida. This idea, well, it's hard to get people to want to join. How do we show them value? And I will tell you, you know, I can use Florida as an example, obviously, because I'm most familiar with it. But when I look at what the Florida State Beekeepers Association has accomplished, I keep thinking if all of our states could do similar things and continue moving forward, you know, beekeepers would have a lot of their issues addressed. And so people might say, well, what is it that beekeepers actually need addressing? politically or at the state or national level. And I'm just going to read a list of a few things that the FSBA has tackled in the last 10 or 12 years. Number one, they pushed, when I first got here, they pushed really hard for the definition of a honey. And now there's a honey standard that's being copied around the country. And people were like, why do we need a definition of honey? Well, before there was a honey standard, all you had to do was slap the word honey on a jar and you could sell it. It didn't actually have to be honey. Well, now there's a definition and standard for it. There's the apiary protection bill here in Florida, where the local municipalities can't tell you that you can or can't keep bees. That's kind of looked at the state level. The beekeepers wanted that. They wanted kind of that protection from municipalities saying that you can't keep bees here, and the FSBA went and got it for them. Bee removal. When I first got here, beekeepers weren't technically allowed to perform bee removals because it was considered pest control without a license. Well, the FSBA worked with other groups and made bee removal possible. The cottage food law, this idea that if you don't bottle your honey in a licensed honey extraction and bottling facility, i.e. a licensed inspected kitchen, then you can't sell it. Well, now, the cottage food law makes it permissible for people who are small scale beekeepers to do that. Personally, the University of Florida has benefited with their relationship with the FSBA. You guys went out and lobbied for and built a brand new bee lab on our campus. You developed a strategy for addressing the veterinary feed directive issue that we had when beekeepers no longer had access to antibiotics and needed prescriptions or VFDs to get it. You also helped out with ag classification issues when there were tax-related issues with areas being zoned agriculture and whether or not beekeeping counted. And, I've just listed these. You guys have also gone after a license plate to benefit bee research and extension, and on and on and on and on and on and on.
I feel like I have goosebumps right now.
I know.
It's just wow, that's so awesome.
But that's the thing is the state association in Florida, and again, I know there's listeners from around the world. This is not just a Trumpet, Florida. I'm just using this as an example. But, the state association of Florida has gone to bat for its beekeepers trying to take on big issues. You guys are always in the state capitol. You're always talking to legislators, the senators, and, the American Beekeeping Federation, the American Honey Producers Association, our two national groups, they do similar things at the national level. And I wish beekeepers saw and found the value in that so that they would know that joining the state association or their local association or national and supporting the cause was worthy, because groups like the FSBA really do care about beekeepers and really do want to address the things that beekeepers feel need addressing. And I think, especially when it comes to political issues, there's strength in numbers. Mm-hmm. If there's a small, weak state association, you're not going to be very powerful when you're trying to lobby on behalf of your constituents. But the FSBA has really been able to push through some things, even during times where a lot of other agencies weren't getting the same type of attention. So, state associations have very important value to their beekeepers beyond just education. They really do fight for and change the lives of their beekeepers, and beekeepers need to know that. And they need to demand it out of their state association or national association, and I think they would. And the state association leadership would value the partnership with their beekeepers. So I've kind of set you up to talk a little bit about that, but I just wanted to point those things out and share with our listeners that there is value in coming together at the associational level.
I really loved hearing that list, Jamie. Thank you so much. Just to point out, the veterinary feed directive is an ongoing thing that we will continue to support. So, we've taken control of the website. And so again, membership is really helping keep things like that going. There's, financial responsibilities to a lot of the stuff that we do. We actively keep a budget so that we can stay within those confines. But we join and are members of many of the organizations you just mentioned. So we truly support our regional and state and national associations, other places. We also, we want to come out and speak to all the local clubs and educate, like Amy mentioned earlier. That's probably my favorite thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been speaking at Bee College for a number of years, and I've always appreciated it. But it was really neat to see how it evolved and still evolves as I, got more involved with the state association. And there's a really gratifying feeling going to a local bee association or bee club and having a member say, I honestly hadn't ever met anybody from Florida State Beekeepers Association before. And I'm really grateful that you came out here and showed us how to make creamed honey tonight. I mean, it's the kind of thing that really beekeepers, I think, make beekeepers really special. We all wear lots of different hats. I already admitted to you that the legislative part wasn't my but I'm more comfortable now, and I feel like we have this amazing support system, having so many different officers and volunteers and committees that are structured. So yeah, honestly, if you don't have a state association in your area, or even a local association, but you feel like you have time to devote, I feel like you'll feel it's very gratifying to come together. We have an example that we can share. I think another thing we can offer folks is an example of our structure. So say a local bee association wanted to start up and they had no idea even how to form a board or create bylaws or a constitution or complete paperwork, we would answer that call. We would say, hey, we can help you with that. That's not a problem. That's what we do. We can even, pull you along until you feel comfortable. And it's a big state, I have to say.
It's a huge state, yeah.
I mean, I didn't realize how big it was until we had that meeting in Chipley about 7 or 8 years ago. It changed the time zone driving there. Once I got there, I was just blown away at that camaraderie and education and support and accomplishments. So a couple goals we have too in the next year or two. Again, the license plate was a really important goal that we've had. It's the third year trying. I think the third year. Apologize if I got that wrong. But the revenue generated from having a honeybee license plate, who does not want a honeybee license plate, okay, would support research in Florida and, again, find solutions for all beekeepers all over. And we're committed to that. If we can't do that successfully, we're going to work on another avenue. And that's why our commercial beekeeping committee and other committees are starting to have more meetings, especially with things changing right now. Our in-person meetings are a little bit, we're not sure. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few months. So we're moving and adapting like our bees do to try to find ways to come up with goals for getting this research money that's needed. And even honeybees. I heard you guys maybe could use some colonies up at near the lab for Humberto to do some research on. And we may have some colonies. Florida State Beekeepers Association is registered as a beekeeping, as beekeepers, and we're part of the Fresh from Florida program. And I said, I think we might have bees. And if we do, we'd be happy to make them available for research. So that's just a taste or a sample of what we've been working on behind the scenes. And there's just so much more.
So Jennifer, we've talked, there's so much, right? There's so much that the state association does. I think on an individual level, what type of resources do these associations have to offer for people? I know personally, I've, benefited with my beekeeping practices just by joining associations, by finding a mentor, right? And meeting other beekeepers. So what other resources would you say that these associations have?
I'd say the sky's the limit. We're still really trying to define those, and we're asking beekeepers what they want. And that was a process that, has taken a few years just from, visiting the local clubs and sending out surveys. Sometimes beekeepers look forward to perks. So we're asking some of our supply companies, beekeeping supply companies, if they're willing to, offer a discount. So we're working on some things like that. I'd say the veterinary feed directive is one thing that is a value that is available for all beekeepers. And, it's tangible. People can wrap their brain around that. We have to maintain that and, take care of the financial responsibility and the education. We host events. We have an annual event. Last year and the year before, we hosted some fun events. I think they were both really fun. And members were able to attend for free. And we had some great speakers, really good attendance. Thankfully, we had you guys come. We always appreciate that so much. So we offer a lot of education as a benefit to the membership. So that's been one way that we've been trying to give back to our members, is just to have a great annual event and have education. Since things have changed a little right now, we're going to shift to some online education and try to roll that out shortly. Again, that's going to be, a benefit and free to members. And of course, I'm sure it'll be made available to everyone, but those are just some examples.
Yeah, those are great examples. I feel that beekeepers are a lot like the critter they keep. Their critter they keep are social animals. And people will often say, well, beekeepers are loners. Well, that is true, but they sure love forming associations, right? There's local associations, state, regional, national, international ones. And I always recommend to people to join and be involved in your nearest local association. And I really do feel like that will have trickle up effects because you'll end up in the state association, maybe even these regional or national ones. Generally speaking, these ones that are kind of local in nature are more educational. But as you move up the chain, there's a lot of policy being shaped because of the lobbying effort. Jennifer, what you mentioned here about the Florida State Beekeepers Association is a really good example about how a state association functions, what it can offer. I encourage beekeepers around the world to find their nearest association, get involved and see what they can offer the association and see if they can't work with their association to make sure that it's offering what the beekeepers need. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamie and Amy.
Absolutely. Listeners, that was Jennifer Holmes, who's the president of the Florida State Beekeepers Association. She runs the honey company, and she's a UF IFA senior honey judge. I probably butchered your company name again, but look, I'm from Georgia. This is the best my tongue can do, so I appreciate having you on board, Jennifer, talking to us about state associations.
It was a pleasure. Thanks to both of you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye.
And guys, we'll have some information in our show notes about the Florida State Beekeepers Association, but we'll also link our regional and national and some international associations that you need to be aware of so that you know how you can get involved to help beekeepers everywhere.
It's everybody's favorite game show, Stump the Chump.
Welcome back, everybody. It is a Q&A time, and we've got a couple of questions from our audience. So, Jamie, the first question I had for you, this is kind of a funny one. So after I work my bees, I smell like smoke for the rest of the day. Is there an ancient beekeeper trick for removing smoke besides taking a shower?
All right. Well, there's two ways to answer this question, and that's the short way and the long way. The short way is no, there's not. When I worked bees, and certainly when I worked bees a lot more than I'm able to today, my wife would always make that joke when I'd come home. I can tell you've been working bees today. You smell like smoke. There's really no remedy for it. I'm only chuckling because this is kind of the thing that all beekeepers struggle with over the years. But if you work bees early in the morning, you're going to smell like smoke the rest of the day. And even if you change outfits, your hair will smell like smoke, your hands will smell like smoke. So you're going to have to take a shower. And believe it or not, I so firmly believe that there's really no other remedy that when we built our new bee lab here at the University of Florida, I made sure we had showers in it because I suspected there would be times where I or others have to work bees in the morning, but meet with our administrators in the afternoon. So we built showers specifically for the purpose. If any of you beekeepers out there know of any good wives' tales or something that we could try, I'd be happy to. I know, for example, when we go fishing, oftentimes these fish cleaning kits that they will come with something that looks like the bar of soap, but it's made of metal. And the idea is if you rub that all over I know. Apparently if you rub it all over your hands, and these are like respectable fishing kits like Bass Pro and others. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is they say if you rub this metal on your hands, the smell of fish will go away. That may or may not be true. I've just not used them enough to know. And I'm wondering, beekeepers out there listening to us, if there are in fact tricks that can help remove smoke from our hands. I know from our clothes, we're basically going to have to change outfits, but maybe you can rub something on you. But try hard not to spray yourself down with cologne or perfume.
That is so funny.
I think that can also be a problem.
That was a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, just take a shower. That's the take-home message.
It's almost like when you eat bacon or make it bacon in your house. That smell just never goes away.
What's funny, Amy, is my wife will no longer cook bacon in the house. We have this gas grill outside that's got a side burner, and anytime we're going to eat anything with bacon, she goes outside and cooks it just for that reason. So bacon and fish and bee smoke, that's what they all have in common. We just discovered it right here on Two Bees in a Podcast.
I was about to say, you just made a great joke.
Oh, did I?
What do those things have in common? Yeah.
They stink.
Okay. All right. So for the next question that we have, so when you first receive a package, I've been told you're supposed to seal the entrance for the first day or two. Is this true?
So that is true, yes and no. So what I would say from the yes part is it might actually be ideal, because what happens is when you install a package, let's slow down and think about this. So you got this package. And
Mm-hmm.
if you read the instructions, it often says, mist the bees with water with a little mister from the outside that kind of helps them clump together, and you dump them into that new hive in which you're wanting to hive them. Well, as they begin to dry off, they'll come out and they can fly away. I have certainly installed, even here at the University of Florida Honeybee Lab, we've installed 100 packages one time where 2 or 3 or more of our colonies just instantly left, and they coalesced into these mega clusters hanging on trees, these mega swarms. And I think in those instances, what's happening is that there can be a virgin queen or a queen in general running around in the package, because believe it or not, the hives that they use to dump the bees into the packages from are different than the hives that they use to rear the queens. So these queens will be in cages from one cohort of hives, and the bees will be dumped into the package from another cohort of hive, and then they'll put the cage in there and ship it to you. So there will be a queen in the package cage, but there may also be a free-running queen that was missed when the bees were shaken into the package, and shook into, placed in the package. I don't know if shook or shaken is the right thing, Amy. You can laugh at me. I'm from Georgia. I'm just moving on. When they are placed into the package. So I think oftentimes what can lead these bees to leave these hives is that there might be a free-running queen, or there was a free-running queen in another package, and they swarmed, and just everybody got swarm fever. I mean, I've seen that with my own eyes. And so what a lot of people will do then to stop these package migrations is they will close the entrance of their hives for 24 hours, just like this questioner asked. And with the premise that if I can get them to stay in their hive for that period of time, then I'm, minimizing the risk that when I open the entrance that I'm going to lose that package. But that can only be done successfully if it's not hot outside.
Sure.
Right? Because you close that entrance and you install a package, and the bees can overheat very quickly during spring and summer. So a lot of people with that kind of premise, and we've even done it here at the University of Florida Bee Lab, is you will actually install those packages, but then move those hives into a heavily air-conditioned room, or maybe even a refrigerated unit, with the idea of keeping them cool, keeping them clustered, trying to coerce them to believing that that is their home, so that when they put them outside and open the entrance, it's not a bad thing.
Sure.
However, okay, that's a lot of discussion around the take-home messages. So take-home message 1 is you can screen the entrance if you want to, but it can't be hot.
Okay.
Most people, take-home message 2, most people I know do not screen entrances. They just kind of accept the risk that if you're installing 100 packages, 2 or 3 might migrate. Actually, what we see as a bigger problem, Amy, is if we install like 10 packages in a straight row, as the bees kind of come out of their hive and try to figure out where home is, they tend to migrate to the end hives. So your colonies on the end get real strong, but your hives in the middle are less strong. And so a lot of people will keep the entrances on packages for that reason.
That's interesting.
So what we have done to combat this at UF, anytime we're installing lots of packages for a research project, is we will mist the bees, open the package, take out the feed can that's in the package, and remove the queen that's in the cage, and we will hang the queen cage between a couple of frames in the center of the hive. Next, we will take out 3 frames from one side of the hive, and we will sit the entire package in that space with the open side up.
Oh.
So and then we close the hive back. So essentially, the package slow releases itself over a couple of hours. They dry off, they come out of that package, they move to the frames, they find their queen, etc. And it's a much slower release rather than this very dramatic dump, shake, move, dump, shake, move. And we found that greatly minimizes drift between hives and certainly reduces the risk that we're going to leave a package. And in fact, the last point I'll make with regard to that is when we put packages in hives for that kind of slow release strategy, we always reduce the entrance just so that when they do dry off, they don't come storming off. But we're only comfortable reducing entrances if the bees have a lot of shade if it's not so hot outside, and if they're on screen bottom board so that there's plenty of ventilation. So to summarize, yes, you can close them up for for a day, but it's got to be cool. Got to be cool. I don't think it's worth doing that. I think that you can slow release them, as I've mentioned, or you can just dump them straight in and just be prepared for migration. That's a great question. And probably when they asked that question, they didn't realize that there was so much information behind it. And that's only because I've made so many mistakes installing packages over the years that I've kind of figured out how to minimize, even though not eliminate it. But when in doubt, you can keep them in a super air conditioned room if they got a screen bottom board, for, do that for 24, 48 hours, and then you can move them out to where you want them to be.
Great. And that kind of helps with the queen pheromones being released too, and them taking to her, right?
Absolutely. That's the key. A lot of new beekeepers don't know that queen is not the queen of the bees in that package. So the bees in that package have got to become accustomed to her too before they're introduced to one another.
Cool.
Which is why she's in a cage.
Yep, that's fair. It was funny. This individual was actually messaging me and saying, "Oh, the queen is in an envelope," and I'm like, "Wait, she's in an envelope?" And he said, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Wait, is she in a cage in an envelope, or she's just roaming in an envelope?" And he was like, "No, she's in a cage in an envelope." And I'm like, "All right, well, now I feel better about what you just told me." That was not enough
information, right?
Exactly. Okay, so while we're kind of talking about swarms, I feel like lately a lot of people have just been asking questions about swarms. So I'll just move forward to the third question that we had. This person had a unique experience to share with what they would call false swarms. So twice within a couple of weeks, they saw what appeared to be a very small swarm flying in and out and also bearding in a tree. So one was the size of a grapefruit and the other was the size of 2 grapefruits, which I don't even know what that is. Like, what's the size of 2 grapefruits?
What kind of grapefruit? We live in Florida, so we know there's multiple types of grapefruit. So there's small ones and big ones. So I'm trying to picture now which variety of grapefruit.
I'm like, is this a softball, a baseball, a beach ball? I don't know.
I think that's always a fair description is to use the ball analogy. But grapefruit, that's fine. I can appreciate that.
Okay, so when they capture the swarm by shaking the nuke, then they inspected. There was no queen in there, but they also could see bees leaving the nuke and flying back to one of the hives. So, all right, long story short, in the third instance, saw another swarm fly out over the water, then return over shore and dissipate. Have you ever seen this behavior before? And what in the world is going on?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to work backwards with those comments. So basically there's 2 swarms that they're trying to explain. And then the third instance, they had this swarm leave and go over a large body of water and then return. So let's start with that one. And is it safe to assume that third one happened in fall too, Amy? The one that went over the water? Or did they specify?
They did not specify.
Okay, well,
wait, did you say fall like seasonal?
Yes, fall seasonal.
I would assume that's probably summer because they just asked this and we're in June.
Got it. Okay, perfect. All right. So there is some belief that bees struggle orienting when they fly over large bodies of water. So I don't exactly know how large the body of water is that they're talking about. So it's possible that they went back to their hive just to restart and try again, tomorrow for that reason. It's also possible that it's a failed swarm. One of the things that I want to preface my answer to this series of questions is, swarming is part of bee biology and biology is messy. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by that is that we always try to assume that things happen the same way every time, that we kind of paint bees into a box, or for that matter, we paint people into a box, or, dogs into a box. We within biology, we are all capable of a huge range of behaviors. So while it is most normal for colonies to swarm in spring, colonies can swarm in summer and in fall. And in southern Florida, they often will swarm all winter too. So a lot of it has to do with the cues that the bees are experiencing. If there's a lot of nectar coming in, if there's warm days, right? If the colony has grown, then the bees can read the conditions erroneously, and they can issue a swarm when it's not otherwise a good time of year to issue a swarm. Fall is a terrible time of year for bees to swarm, because even though it's natural in the sense that the bees did it, and the bees are natural. So if they did it, it must be natural. But that doesn't mean it's ideal. So if your research has shown the later into the year the bee colony swarms, the less likely it is to survive winter. So I would argue to you that those swarms that you saw in fall are perfectly within the range of behaviors that one would expect in messy biology. However, those swarms are almost certainly going to not survive winter. So your question is why would they do it? Again, bees could misread cues. It could be possible that virgin queens emerged. Maybe the colony was queenless and multiple queens emerged at the same time. So instead of one of them, instead of the two queens fighting, one just left with a swarm and bees left with. I mean, there's just a lot of potential explanations for why they swarmed that's within the range of this is normal. What I would argue to you is that, you did the right thing. You saw the swarms. You tried to hive them. I don't know that there's a logical explanation that we have to seek or necessarily hear to understand what happened, except to say that, had they continued on with the process, they would have almost certainly died. Why would they cluster on a tree limb and then fly back? Maybe they clustered and the queen never landed. Maybe they clustered and she went back, so they went back. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons that this may have happened. And again, it's kind of within the range of natural behaviors that bees are capable of doing. But the very reason you're asking me is because it's not best for them to do it that time of year. So we see lots of reasons that bees will issue these swarms off season. But whatever the reason, the swarm's almost always doomed unless they return home.
Sure. And this person had used the words false swarms, so I didn't know, is that a term that people use?
Yeah, beekeepers do that. They'll say fall swarms or winter swarms. They basically just mean a swarm that happens in fall. It's not like
Gotcha.
if you think about it, Amy, if you've got 1,000 colonies, some small percentage of them is going to make a mistake and try to swarm in fall. I mean, I'll use Florida as an example, and I appreciate that a lot of our listeners are from around the world, but to use Florida as an example, we have a pretty significant honey flow in August and September. And it's with the invasive species, Brazilian pepper. And there's so much nectar that comes in off of that plant that colonies can almost get artificial feedback. Hey, we're growing. The resources are abundant. It's still hot. Let's swarm. And, that's a late summer, almost, when September rolls around, it's almost an early fall swarm. And so beekeepers just refer to these late swarms just based on when the seasons are, fall swarms, winter swarms, things like that. It's nothing unique. It just illustrates that when you've got a mess load of bee colonies in one place, you're going to have these errant behaviors kind of pop up here and there. But incidentally, it's this natural diversity that drives the improvement of species over time. These behaviors tend to get weeded out if they're no good or amplified if they're useful. And in this case, I can't imagine a useful case for it, but nevertheless, it's within the realm of normal.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for submitting your questions. We've been getting a lot of feedback on Facebook and Instagram and even on our emails. So keep it coming. We love positive reinforcement. So, if you guys have positive things to say about our podcast, let us know. If not, don't tell us. That's fine.
Amy, actually, you raised an interesting point. One of the things I want to say is kind of, we thank our listeners for the questions. Hey, if you like us, go into our podcast and rate us. It helps spread the word, helps us get more. Amy and I, we don't get, paid extra to do this. This is something that we really want to do to try to get information out to beekeepers. So we just want to reach as many beekeepers as we can. So like us, share us, rate us. That helps us spread this podcast around so that more people can listen and benefit. So thank you guys all for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Two Bees in a Podcast. We would like to give an extra special thank you to our audio engineer, James Weaver, and to our podcast coordinator, Jacqueline Iyenje. Without their hard work, Two Bees in a Podcast would not be possible.
For more information and additional resources for today's episode, don't forget to visit the UF-IFAS Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratories website, ufhoneybee.com. Do you have questions you want answered on air? If so, email them to honeybee@ifas.ufl.edu or message us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at UF Honeybee Lab. While there, don't forget to follow us. Thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Podcast.